To all who shall see these presents, greetings. Ruckdog here, back with another Dystopian Wars 3.0 Orbat overview. This time, we're going to be looking at the Enlightened, or the Covenant of the Enlightened, as it's also known, for the full-length words there. So, this is the second of these Orbat overviews that I've done. We're going to be following more or less the same process as we did for the Union Orbat video. And we're going to talk about special rules, the weapons overview, we're going to look at the stat lines, and then we'll talk a little bit about what your options are for building fleets. I'll give some ratings for the faction, and then I'll give a few final thoughts. All right, so before we get too much further, a couple of disclaimers. This is based off of the, well, that should say the Enlightened Orbat, so real good on me for making sure my slides were updated. But yeah, the Enlightened Orbat version 1.04. That is the correct version number, I should hasten to add. I just screwed up the faction name, because of course I did. And I've actually played with some of the stat lines in this Orbat. As a matter of fact, pretty much all of the games that I've played for Dystopian Wars 3.0 have been Covenant versus the Commonwealth. And therefore, this is one of the Orbats I've got at least a little bit of experience with. That being said, I am not saying I have a very good winning record from playing those games. So keep in mind that, and just remember, large grains of salt are very much a warranted precaution there. Okay, onwards and upwards here. First off, special rules. We've got a few different special rules here. This is, you might note, a few more than what we had for the Union. Enlightened Science. So this is basically a repair roll buff. Okay, and what it means is that when you get an exploding hit in the end phase while you're trying to repair things like your various critical damages, you can actually heal your model a little bit by a single point of damage if you get a exploding hit. So basically, again, if you think in terms of rolling a standard D6, if you roll a 6 on your repair roll, then you get to earn back a point of hull points. Now, a big point here, though, is that crippled models cannot actually do that little trick there, right? So that means if you're crippled, you can't heal yourself to the point of being battle ready anymore. And then you also have the option, because it says may receive, if you don't want to get a generator shutdown critical damage, you can get a Stergenium flare instead, okay? And that is important because the Covenant love their generators, and we'll get into that here in a little bit. Luminiferous Defenses. So despite being an awesome name, what this means is that you can avoid some damage, possibly, by using your air defense value, your crippled air defense value, against basically gunnery attacks, which is most of the attacks in the game. Most of the attacks in the game have the gunnery quality to them. So, in a way, this is sort of like the way the old shields from previous editions of Dystopian Wars worked in a sense, because you're now rolling dice to counteract the number of hits you have coming in from an attack. Interestingly, this is only size mass 2 and above units, and it also doesn't apply if you have shredded defenses. So, as a defense, if you have a shredded defense, Luminiferous doesn't work. Pfeister Constructs. So this is the cyborg whales that the Covenant can launch. This is a special SRS, right? Gives you submerged and piercing qualities, which is potentially very useful. So just as a quick memory refresher here, I suppose I should mention what a piercing type of thing means, right? So we'll go ahead and just cover that here real quick. Pull it up. All right, so if a weapon is piercing, that means that you receive a critical damage roll if you would only otherwise hit the armor, right? So this is basically giving you a extra critical damage roll, which can be pretty good. And of course, Submerged is useful because that helps limit the amount of defenses that a unit that's being attacked with this can use. 4 action dice is pretty good because it's an additional die over what you usually get for an SRS token. Note that you can't use this against aerial or ground units. Makes sense. They're whales, can't fly, can't go onto the shore. And interestingly enough here, they can only be intercepted if no other SRS tokens are making an attack run on the same target. However, they cannot combine with other types of SRS tokens, right? So All in all, that's a lot of words to say. They're whales. They sort of act like intelligent torpedoes. They're resolved separately from your standard flying SRSs. So that's, oops, excuse me. So that's something to keep in mind when you're using those. Fearless Fighters. Okay, so this is an SRS buff for the non-Pfeister Construct SRS. It gives a +2 when you're using them as a boost for air defense, vice a +1. So this is actually really good because it doubles essentially the amount of help that your friendly SRS tokens are providing to your units. And then finally, we have Wave Lurker. All right, now this is something that's been a part of the Covenant going all the way back to the old version 1.0 days under Spartan, right? But this allows the Covenant's models to essentially act like a poor man's submarine. You can slow down a bit, but you gain the Submerged Trait. All right. Now, the Submerged Trait is important because it gives you Obscured, and it gives you the ability to move through units during your movement, as long as you don't end your movement overlapping those units, right? Then you have the downside here. Attacks from a wave lurking model only count a single hit from each heavy hit result, right? So normally a heavy hit is 2 hits, and then exploding hits are where you get 2 hits and another dice. Well, with a wave lurking model, that heavy hit only counts as a single hit. The kicker here is that they cannot use generators, which again, as we just mentioned, is sort of a big deal for the Covenant because they love their generators. And lots of models have generators, as we'll see. And then, of course, if you are navigation locked, or if you have the chaos and disarray level of disorder, no go on the Wave Lurker. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but the best way to think about Wave Lurker is it's a way to help your units sneak up or approach a opponent into close range without taking as much damage as they approach. All right, weapons overview. So we've got a couple of things to point out here. This is a larger list than what the Union had, and there's more sort of special sauce involved here, right? So we have a couple different classes of weapons that are somewhat unique to the Covenant to talk about. We've got etheric weapons, okay? Then we have, there's another etheric one. Then we have particle weapons. Then we have, there's particle beam over there. I was looking for that. And then we have pulse weapons, okay? Now, all of these have various different capabilities. One of the big ones that they all have in common is this sustained special rule, okay? Sustained is a very nice, I'm not going to highlight all of it because it's all over the place here, but sustained is a very nice thing to have, right? Because what does sustained allow you to do? Well, sustained allows you to re-roll any of the dice from your action pool, okay? So, and this is just from the initial pool, right? So if you roll 5 dice and you get, an exploding hit, 2 heavy hits, and then, the other 2 are counters or misses, you can re-roll those 2 counters or misses, okay? This is a potentially, so I guess I should say in a way, this is similar to the older sustained fire model assigned rule from previous editions of Dystopian Wars, if you're familiar with that. And as I just mentioned, it is all over the Orbat here, all over these special weapons that they have. One of the other things that you see a lot of as you sort of look over the various special weapons that you have here is you have lots of homing, like the torpedoes and the rockets tend to be homing. All right, and so what does homing allow you to do? Well, it means that you cannot be obscured if you're being attacked with these weapons, okay? So that is a way to help try and punch through models that are otherwise relying on that obscured ability to maintain their defenses. In addition, if you happen to roll a blank, i.e. a 1 on a roll of a d6, you get to re-roll those for anything that's homing. So that's also potentially very powerful. Overall, we have the Etheric Broadside, Etheric Lance, and the heavy Etheric Broadside. And these sort of replace the standard broadsides that you see on a lot of other Orbats. This heavy particle cannon is a sort of a rare weapon, right? So I'll put a little dot here for what I mean by rare weapons is that these are basically just the special sauce for a particular model. Same thing with these Tyndall cyclonic missiles, which we'll get to in a second here. The Stergenium Agitator is also something that's a bit of a special sauce thing here. This M is a reference to the target's mass value. Okay, so if you have a mass 2 ship, then that's going to be 6 dice, or if you have a mass 3 dice, that's going to be 9 dice. So Stergenium Agitator is essentially really good against large models and not so good against smaller models, just because you're not going to get as many dice. The amount of dice you get is going to be based on the size of your target. Reminiscent of the old Republic of France heat lances from the Spartan days, really. Now, these torpedo salvos and these rocket salvos, right, these are mostly similar to the standard versions that other factions get. The dice pools are slightly different, not drastically different, but slightly different. So, for example, you know, a Seeker rocket battery at the closing range has 6 dice and gets 2 in support, whereas a standard rocket battery has 6 dice with 3 in support. Okay, so broadly similar, just a little bit of a special sauce with the homing capability and a slight tweak to the dice pools. And in general, these slight tweaks, these slight tweaks to these various weapons are all going to be in the downward direction, i.e., they're going to drop a couple dice here and there as you look at these, and that's probably just a balancing concern for the additional buff that the special rule gives you. Hydrothermic Borer, yeah, that's a special sauce thing too. Same thing with the CS Chocmaw that we have up here. And we'll cover all of those here in a little bit when we get to them. So as you can see, compared to the Union, which we looked at in the last video, lots and lots of differences in the weapons systems here compared to the sort of the standard weapons that you get out of the back of the rulebook or from the previous Orbat that we looked at. There is also outfitting yards, the Callimachus Chrono Lathe. This is just like things like the Chocmaw, this is something that's specifically to attached to a model, right? Same thing with the Chaos Orb and the Stergenium Agitator, okay? This is going to come up for particular models based on their stat profiles, but it isn't going to be something that you can just sort of slap on any random unit inside your list. So we'll take a brief moment to take a closer look here. So this is the Chrono Lathe is interesting, right? Because it's got 2 modes of operations. Okay, you can use it to heal a model as long as it's battle ready. So this is similar to the Enlightened Engineers special rule, where you can potentially repair yourself as long as you're battle ready. Once you go into the crippled status, and you're sort of stuck in that crippled status. And then you can also use it to provide a more reliable arrival for your reserves, which is potentially useful if you're relying on lots of reserves. What's also interesting is that they say it's not affected by generator offline critical damage, so it doesn't count as a generator, essentially. Now, the Diophantus Chaos Orb, right? This is a another sort of special thing, right? So this is another 2-way operation. One is to allow you to sort of mine your Victory and Valor card deck, okay? It not only allows you to draw extra cards, it also allows you to keep extra cards in your hand, so that could be a potential deal breaker, depending on how or I shouldn't say deal breaker, it could be a major swing in the game, because there are some very powerful Victory and Valor cards out there. And then the other way you can use it is to treat it as a heavy particle can, so you can actually use this as an offensive weapon. Very flexible with a 360-degree fire arc. Again, not a generator, so generator offline doesn't affect it. And then finally, Stergenium Agitator. So this causes a very interesting effect here, where you can add a number of action dice equal to the target's mass, right? So this is where we were talking about the agitator down here, right? So this can be a boost to your shooting. And again, as I said earlier, it's going to be better against larger models, just because you'll get more dice based off of that multiplier. Excuse me. All right, so here's where we're at for stat lines. So what we'll see here is we've got mass 4. We have a vault ship, which is proxied There's not an official model for this one yet as of the recording of this video, but you can proxy it using the old carrier model from the Spartan days, the big A-frame looking ship. You have a named version of it called the Schneider, which we'll take a look at here in a second. Then down at Mass 3, you have two options, the Descartes control ship and the Hypatia generator ship. Both of these models are included in the Hunt for Prometheus box set, so these have been with us since the game launched, all the way back at the beginning of the year. And then, of course, we have named versions of both of those ships here. Mass 2, we have quite a few more options because we actually have essentially two sprues for Mass 2 models with the Covenant fleet, right? You've got the original launch version, and then you've got a more advanced version that allows you to do things like the light carrier and the support carrier and that type of thing. What's interesting here is that we actually have a Mass 2 named ship, the Belgica. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Which is a sort of special version of the Antarctica Superiority Cruiser. And then now at Mass 1, we've got a couple of submarines. We've got an assault machine, and then we've got the Xebec and the Frigate, which are, you know, your standard small ship options for the Covenant. And the Frigate and the Xebec are built off the same sprue as the earlier Mark I Mass 2 models. Basically, these are the two options you can build coming out of the Hunt for Prometheus box set, right? Anyway, moving on. Let's take a look at our stat lines here, starting with the Vault ship, right? So this is a carrier, right? You've got a capacity of 6. Not super great capacity, right? So we remember, right, the Union Enterprise class had 10 versus 6. However, you'll see that it's very much a particle-based weapons platform, okay? So that means that you have lots of sustained weapons here. And if you look at the firing arcs, you'll see that you're really oriented towards being able to shoot out the front. So this is a particularly deadly opponent as you face it, right? So you've got 3 particle beamers that at long range, those are 4 dice, and then they link with 3. So that is a initial attack at long range closing of, what, 10 dice? Not bad at all. And then once you move into the next range band, the closing range band, then you start seeing that ends up going up to like 11, right? So not drastically increasing at range, but it starts off pretty deadly. So then you've got torpedo salvos forward and aft. You've got your etheric broadside, which is also has the advantage of being sustained and gives decent dice to boot. So this is definitely, you know, sort of a shooty platform. The SRS capacity is almost a bonus, really. You'll notice here that you can replace particle beamers with these different weapons here. I imagine that the aft-facing particle beamer will probably be a prime candidate for this because it'll have the least impact to your shooting capability overall. And some of this might actually be relatively worth taking. I can see a particular case for the Disharmonizer or the Stergenium Agitator. Here you talk about how you can get your, basically take away your carrier capability to get your Chrono Lathe capability, or you can get the Chaos Orb. So this is really going to depend on whether you want this to be a carrier or more of a support ship, right? Now on the downside, this thing does have temperamental design, which isn't great because it means it's going to be somewhat less effective at its repair tests. But that being said, this is definitely a beefy model. The 8 hull here is nothing to sneeze at. You know, armor 8, Citadel of 14. You know, this is about as beefy as they come for a Mass 4 model. So I think it's probably going to be pretty well worth its 420 points. The Schneider, so what we have here is going whole hog on the molecular disharmonizer, right? And the molecular disharmonizer is a very interesting weapon in that it has a very low lead capability. In other words, it gets a single dice as the lead attack, but then it combines for lots more dice. So 8 is the combining. So the first one would get 1, and these two would contribute 8 each for a total of 16. And it gives you a chance to really generate lots of dice. And those dice have the piercing capability, and they ignore shield generators. What they don't have is sustain, so you don't get that fancy reroll that you get. But that is sort of the big difference here, is that you get these molecular disharmonizers vice your particle beams. It comes with the Chaos Orb, which is a paid-for upgrade on the standard Arc ship. And then you still retain the internal shield generator and the temporal design. Those are inherited from the Archimedes. The elite crew, this is not bad because you do have a pretty healthy fray value of 12. And so you will tend to want to try and get into boarding range. And that means you'll be counterboarded, which is why it's handy to have this defending from an assault capability. Whether or not it's worth 500 points is going to be it's going to be a question of style, I think, or, preference. I would guess that this might work well in large battles with high numbers of points and less well in smaller games, just because, as I mentioned in that Union video, my general impression of Dystopian Wars 3.0 is that if you have to choose between smaller numbers of more expensive units or larger numbers of cheaper units, going with a larger number of cheaper units is generally going to be better. But, in a larger battle, say 2,000-ish points or more, this could definitely be a good anchor for the list. All right, so now on to Mass 3, Descartes control ship. So 250 points, that's about the going rate for a Mass 3 ship, if you remember from the Union list in the battleships. You've got particle beamers, right? And this is, again, notice that they all fire forward, so that's all a very useful thing when you're closing. I've used this ship so far in a lot of my games. What makes it a control ship is the fact that it is a Pfeister Construct launching ship, right? So that's what makes it a quote-unquote control ship. You see it's got a capacity of 3 Pfeisters, okay? Which, if you remember, because they get 4 attack dice each, means you can achieve up to 12 attack dice off of this single ship. It's got a couple of other fancy things. You can take these pulse emitters or Stergenium Agitators instead of the particle beamers. Whether or not you're going to want to do that, so I would say that in general, the particle beamers, for my money, are probably the best option for this ship. The Stergenium Agitator, it could potentially give you a lot more dice to go Mass 3 hunting, but I would honestly rather have the particle beamer most of the time, I think, but that's just me, right? Then, of course, we have some other Pfeister support options here. Surgical Harbor, right? This allows you to try and prevent your Pfeister constructs from being removed from things like defensive fire or even Stergenium flares, right? So that could potentially allow you to keep the Pfeister constructs in action as opposed to having them removed, okay? All right, onwards and upwards here. The Oedipus, this is a special variant of the Descartes control ship. Very, very similar. You'll notice that there is a slight points bump to 25 points, and you might be wondering what the special ability is. Well, first of all, it gets to capacity 4, so that's helpful. And then you also get an internal Fury generator, which, just to sort of refresh everybody's memory here about the difference between a Fury generator and a shield generator. The Fury generator allows you to improve the speed of a model, and it allows you to improve the fray by +3, right? So that means that this actually goes to 6, and this actually goes to 13. So that is a really good fray value, and so obviously this is the, charge the enemy, I want to hit them with my sword version of the ship. And in all honesty, from what I've seen with my games I've played so far, there is a tendency for models to close rapidly. And that is not necessarily a bad way to go to be able to do that, right? Now, the one thing that I haven't noticed or haven't noted so far that I should mention for both the Descartes and the Oedipus is they do not have wave lurking, okay? So that does hurt their ability to get close to the enemy without taking as much return damage from return fire. So that's sort of the downside for this class of ship. Now, the other one is the Hypatia Generator ship, okay? So particle beamer armament, very similar to the Descartes. I mean, if you look at the two models, right, they basically use the same hull. They're the same rough general shape and size. They just have a different fit. One is oriented towards using the Pfeister constructs. This one's oriented towards having lots of generators, okay? So you notice that you have the ability to both replace your particle beamer weapons with pulse emitters or Stergenium agitators, okay? And again, you might wonder, why do I want to take a pulse emitter over a particle beamer? What's the difference, right? Well, if you look at the weapons profile, right, basically the pulse emitters have less range, but are really good at close range, okay? So point blank range, they get more dice, whereas at the closing range, they get less dice than a particle beamer, and at long range, they don't get any dice. That's what a pulse emitter does for you. So if you're looking to charge this ship into close range, which it can do better than, you know, the control ship because it's got Wave Lurker, then taking those pulse emitters may not necessarily be a bad choice, because you'll be able to unleash more dice at close range and point blank range than you would have been able to with the particle beamers. So hey, that's a thing. And then of course, the Stergenium Agitator might be worth taking if you're okay with giving up range in order to get a slight boost against larger models. Now, the fun thing about this ship is that it has to take 3 generators, okay? Now, you get some for free. You have an internal shield generator, so you've got that already no matter what. But then you can take any of the other options that are out there, right? And so there's lots of theory here about generator combos and options. I don't really have a lot of experience playing with these, so I don't want to hazard a guess too much. But things that sort of stand out to me is that things like the null generator could be helpful if you're talking about trying to get into close range to use things like pulse emitters, because this allows you to take generators offline for models that are within 15 inches. So if you're going to do a close range combat specialist, null generator is not a bad way to go. Fury generator, likewise, can be very helpful to get you into close range and then boost your fray capability once you're there. So that's not bad at all. And then you've got, you know, Repulsion Generator. Okay, so Repulsion Generator is helpful in that it can give you extra submerged defense. So if you're worried about torpedoes or other types of submerged attacks, that could be really good. It also allows you to move over terrain and intervening models without a collision. So again, that could be really helpful once you get to close confines and close quarters combat. The Prometheus. This is the titular ship from the 2-player box set. And it provides a couple of changes and differences, right? So first of all, you notice that you lose the capability to take your pulse emitters, right? You can't swap out these weapons. You're pretty much stuck with that basic fit. The generator options that you see here are pretty much the same as with the standard Hypatia. It's even got the same costing. You gain the temperamental design special rule, though, so that's a downside. That helps explain some of the slightly cheaper cost. So why would you want to take this one? Well, if you don't plan on taking any of the pulse emitters or Stergenium agitators, and you're just going to take the standard fit, and you don't mind having that temperamental design feature added to the ship, then this could be your budget option to get a Hypatia generator ship for slightly less points. But in general, I think you're mostly going to want to take the Hypatia, because I think the 5 points is worth the trade for losing the temperamental design, even if you were going to take a plain vanilla basic Hypatia generator ship. This is really only something you're going to want to take if you have you just absolutely don't have 5 extra points from somewhere, and you need to save those 5 points by doing something. But even then, I would prefer to take the Hypatia and just maybe take a cheaper generator if I could. All right, so on to the Mass 2. We have the Antarctica Superiority Cruiser. So this is a deadly ship. It's chock full of lots and lots of weapons, right? So you've got this heavy particle cannon, which is limited to the forward 90-degree arc, and this is that big ball turret on top. And this is a pretty good dice generator. It's got piercing and sustain. The only downside is that you really don't have anything you can link it with. So you're going to be stuck with using just the main gun here by itself. Still, though, it's more than powerful enough to put a decent hurt on another Mass 2 model, and you can always combine it with other ships in the squadron if you take multiple models. Particle beamers are both good. You got a decent broadside. You even have torpedoes. You have the option to replace the particle beamers with a pulse emitter or a Stergenium Agitator. I could see an argument for doing this with the aft particle beamer if you're looking to be aggressive with your fleet and close. It does have an internal generator, as I mentioned at the very beginning, right? The Covenant love their generators. So pretty much everything that is Mass 2 and above has a generator capability of some kind on it, as we'll see. And you can replace it for additional points. The one caveat here is if you do have multiple ships in a unit, you have to have the same internal generator for all three. So that limits your effectiveness a little bit. I gotta say, for 155 points, right, this is a very expensive Mass 2 model, okay? You are basically looking at what you might have thought of in the past for previous editions of Dystopian Wars as a battle cruiser. And the fact that it has 5 hull in its battle-ready state kind of bears that out. This is... Well, you know, this is a ship that suffers from that problem I've been talking about where the game is not super rewarding of having lower numbers of more expensive units. I think it might be better to look at one of the cheaper options just to enable you to get more units and more models on the table. But, you know, that being said, Wave Lurker and Luminiferous Defenses, those do help quite a bit. This is really sort of a long to closing range fighter, though. You don't want to get too close with this model. The armor is only 6, and the citadel value is only 10. So it's going to want to not get too close because the particle beamers give pretty decent dice at the long and closing ranges. So this is the special version of the Superiority Cruiser, and this is, again, something that's kind of unique, a named Mass 2 model. Which is kind of fun. What does this bring different to the table? Well, the basic stats are a little different. You get a boost here to the armor value from 6 to 7, although the crippled armor value actually goes down by 1 to the extent that that matters. And then your aerial defense values are slightly lower, but your submerged defense values are slightly higher, which is sort of an interesting twist. You have Stergenium Agitators installed as a base. You got Etheric Broadsides, port and starboard, and a secret Torpedo Salvo. You have the option to take escorts, which is different, right? So this is a, and then also gains here this maritime patrol capability. So this is a very interesting unit. I could see a case for taking this as sort of a interesting sort of super ship to anchor a smaller fleet with. 185 points is pretty pricey, and you can only take the one. You can't get a multiple ships unit because it's unique, right? So by the time you look at adding escorts or corvettes to it, you're going to be darn near battleship levels of points. And you only still have that hull value of 5 and 4. So, you know, this model is still not that much more difficult to kill than the standard Antarctica is. Might be fun for a scenario-based game where you don't have to deal with the different capabilities or requirements for fleet building. If this ship had the flagship special rule where you could take this to anchor an entire fleet or component, this might be a much more interesting option. But as is, beyond scenario purposes, I'm not really sure I could justify taking the ship in the list just because it's so expensive and it's still really not that much harder to kill than any other Mass 2 model is. All right, so here's a interesting option, the Châtelet Recon Cruiser. As you see, there's a lot going on here, lots of words. So Maritime Patrol, Vanguard, Combat Air Patrol, this is all helpful. It's got a minor SRS capacity, right? So you might be asking yourself, why do I want a class that only has a single SRS? Obviously, you're not really using that SRS for offensive capability too much, unless you're going to go after a random Mass 1 model that's in danger of getting some sort of objective condition met, like occupying a table corner or something like that. This could be useful for that. But if you remember from the Pfeister Construct special rules, you know, you can't intercept a Pfeister Construct if there's a SRS already in contact with the target, right? So this could actually be used as a buff for a Pfeister-focused fleet because it would allow your Pfeisters to get into their attack run without having as much opportunity to be intercepted. So that's a possibility. You can take your pulse emitter or Stergenium Agitator on these guys, although they're charging a bit of a higher premium for the agitators than some other classes are for whatever reason. It does have an internal shield generator, and then of course we also have Luminiferous Defenses and Wave Lurkers. So you do have some defensive tricks up your sleeve to help keep this thing moving. So overall, an interesting choice. 90 points, not bad for a Mass 2 model in this list, as we'll see. So it could be a reasonable option. And I think it would especially be useful in a Pfeister-focused fleet, right? Claudius Merchantman, this is sort of an interesting thing. We saw something similar in the Union, where you had a specialized Union supply ship. The name's escaping me off the top of my head here, so give me a second here to look up what the heck that ship name was. What was that? Light cruiser, heavy cruiser. Yeah, the Montgomery support ship, right? So the Montgomery support ship had some special rules that allowed it to support repairs and field repairs. Instead of that, though, this has more offensive firepower, and it acts as a supply vessel, which gives you some ability to boost your victory and valor. You can take this as a single unit, and you can get additional ships for 75 points. You know, this is an interesting option that you could look at if you're really interested in trying to maximize your victory and valor play. I mean, it has decent rocket capabilities. You know, a Seeker rocket battery with those two being able to link together because they have both forward and aft capability. You're going to be able to get both of those on a lot of targets without too much trouble. And so that means that, you know, if you look at the dice pool that's generating, a single Seeker rocket battery is going to give you 6 dice. And then the other one will give you 2. So that's 8 dice homing. That's not bad. That's not bad. That could definitely be a threat to a lot of Mass 2 models and clearly a threat to Mass 1 models. So not bad as far as the offense goes. But, you know, it's going to be up to the individual player about whether or not they want to try and fit this into their list. And given the sort of the not great way that the rocket batteries combine, you know, there's really no reason why you wouldn't want to just take a single one of these. And if you wanted to take more than one, you would keep them as separate units. That would allow you to have some ability to look at more dice, or I'm sorry, more cards, right? It says once per turn on their activation, this unit can look at the top card from the Victory and Valor deck. Which means that if you have multiple units, then you can easily look at multiple cards, right? So again, this is a mine the deck strategy for your Victory and Valor. The Copernicus Heavy Cruiser. So this is kind of the Antarctica's little brother. The difference here is that it downgrades the particle beamer on the aft end to an Etheric Lance, which, if you recall, is a slightly weaker weapon than the particle beamer. So the particle beamer has longer range is the big thing, whereas the Etheric Lance here only goes out to closing and doesn't have any long-range gunnery. Now, interestingly enough, there's no reason you can still link or combine the Etheric Lance and the particle beamer because they have the exact same qualities associated with them. So that could be potentially helpful. Other than that, very similar in terms of build-out. The biggest difference is the cost, and you're trading the particle beamer for that. So in a way, this sort of suffers from the same pluses and minuses as the Antarctica does. You'll notice that less hull than the Antarctica as well, but you know the stat line is not super inspiring otherwise. It's got decent aerial and submerged defense values, but you know it's still not going to stop a determined attack from another unit of Mass 2 models even. So Lovelace Cruiser. So this is kind of a standard option for the Covenant. This is like their main line cruiser, at least according to the fluff, right? So 93 points gets you a pretty solid option. 2 particle beamers, broadside, and a torpedo salvo. So there's a decent suite of weapons here. And then, of course, you have the standard special rules. And it does have Wave Lurker. So this is a very decent option for a cruiser, although it is more expensive, but that's also because it's got more stuff packed into it. So Void Engine Cruiser, the Newton. This is an interesting option here. So the Void Engine, right, is a way to basically provide interesting effects to targets, right? This is essentially a teleportation option. Allows you to move one ship can move another unit within basically 5 inches around if it gets a hit or heavy hit, right? If you add additional ships, it adds 2 inches to the range. So you can take up to 2 additional units. That means that you could teleport a friendly or enemy unit up to 9 inches, fully maxed out, if you get the roll to go off. And then if you get an exploding hit, you actually get to take a unit off the table and place it into reserve. Okay. So this, and of course, even if you have 3 models in the unit, you only get to do the Void Engine activation once, as it says there. This is sort of bonkers. It's fun. It's fluffy, right? It's in keeping with the weird science type of faction that the Covenant is. I'm just not sure that this is really reliable enough to take on the regular. You have to roll for it, and you have a 50-50 chance of this doing nothing. And for 136 points, you know, that is a tough trade-off. This is a high-risk, high-reward option, and you would be very ill-advised, I think, to try and build an entire list around this capability. You're paying more than the Copernicus Heavy Cruiser at 133 points, 136 points, and you have far fewer weapons, and you're relying on this weird option here. Could potentially be very valuable and could change the game in certain situations easily, but you know, like I said, the reliability issue makes me sort of hesitant to recommend this one. All right, the Plinius Support Carrier. All right, so this is pretty much every faction is moving towards having a Mass 2 carrier of some kind, so it's got sort of the standard SRS capacity of 4 that you see with most of these Mass 2 carriers. In addition to the SRS, it's got some decent rocket and torpedo salvo capability. Interestingly, this is very similar to the Claudius Merchantman's fit out, right? This is essentially the same weapons fit as the Claudius Merchantman. You get the cloud hunting, which is great. Now, here's the thing. There's not really very many aerial units in the game right now. So this is sort of a more situational capability for the game as it stands. But I have a feeling that as the model releases keep coming and we start seeing more aerial units in the game, cloud hunting is going to become more and more worthwhile, more and more useful. So not a bad option to get some more SRS onto the table, because you can also take 2 more. So if you really want to do SRS with the Covenant, taking the Plinius over the Ark ship might actually be a better way to go, because you can get equivalent SRS capacity or more SRS capacity for about the same points, as opposed to trying to do it as a single ship. The Quintillion Bombardment Cruiser. So this is a interesting ship, right? It has the Tyndall cyclonic missiles, okay? And this is, in some ways, kind of the Covenant answer or equivalent to the cruise missiles that we saw on the Union Orbat. The cruise missile silos, essentially. So what those cyclonic missiles do for you is they give you lots of really cool special features. Okay, so let's just take a look at the weapons qualities for those. So what you have is aerial, extreme range, so we can shoot them out to 40 inches, and blast, and limited. Okay, so remember that blast means you use a circular template, and all of those units get that number of dice on that circular template. And those, by the way, are very similar to the special abilities on the cruise missiles, with the exception being the cruise missiles had high velocity, whereas the cyclonic missiles here actually have the different ability of extreme range. Okay. the Americans can still get extreme range on those cruise missiles by having their spotters up, the Acrins, but here it's built in. So in a way, this is very similar to the American Washington guided missile cruiser, right? You get the sustain quality for those, which is really great for your cyclonic missiles. Because now you're talking about 12 sustained at 40 inches. That's a pretty deadly long range thing. Very pricey, 148 points, right? And so 3 of these is going to be pushing a Mass 4 model's worth of points out, almost 450 points. But this is a great option if you're interested in trying to do some sort of massive alpha strike at the beginning of the game. Probably not going to be able to do this spotter capability that way because of the SRS requirement, but still, you can have a great option there. You notice here that you have to take one of the generators, and you can have a different generator on each model in the unit, which is sort of interesting. Yeah, I don't know. This is going to be one of those things where it's a high risk, high reward. Not quite as high of a risk as the Void Engine Cruiser here, but still kind of high risk just because you're sort of relying on this as an alpha strike. And once you get within point blank range, your cyclonic missiles cease to be effective. So this is definitely a ranged bombardment option. You want to keep these guys at longer range. Stiletto Fast Cruiser. So this is a Speed 10 Mass 2 model, which is kind of nuts. They don't have tons of weapons, but they are not too expensive, especially for a Covenant ship. You get the ability to replace the particle beamer with a Stergenium Agitator or pulse emitter. That is not a bad option because this is going to be something that is getting into close range, which means that close range focused pulse emitter is not a bad option, I would say. It does have a shield generator, plus it's got Luminiferous Defenses plus Wave Lurker, so that could be very helpful. And it's even got full steam ahead, which is you can double the drift, so you can do 4 inches instead of 2 as long as you don't turn. So this is, definitely a drive me closer, I want to hit them with my sword type of ship. Potentially very useful and probably a good way to go if you're looking to free up points in your list for something else that you want, because it's one of your cheaper Mass 2 options, right? All right, the Tacitus Assault Cruiser. So this is all about range, right? So you have particle beamers that you can replace with the pulse emitters, which I think you might want to do since this is something that you're trying to get into close range, basically. And it's got a interesting ability of focus gunnery, right? So if you're shooting everything at a single target, then it gives you a +2 to your dice pools. So that could be a great way to get lots and lots of dice in a very close range attack, essentially, right? The Vanguard Cruiser, the Ulysses Vanguard Cruiser. So speed 9, so not quite as fast as the Stiletto, but still pretty darn fast for a Mass 2 model. It's got all of the usual special rules, plus it gains Fearless Fighters. And then it's also got Vanguard, which is, remember, that redeployment special rule that allows you to move a model around up to 5 inches after you deploy it. So that's kind of cool. The Pfeister Surgical Ship. So this is this is the only ship outside of the Descartes right now that deals with the Pfeister constructs, okay? So you can launch 2 on its own, plus it gains the Surgical Harbor that the Descartes also has, which, remember, allows you to potentially keep your Pfeister constructs in play despite Stergenium flares or that type of thing. It's got Etheric Lances, so it has decent firepower for its direct fire, especially at close range. So remember, the Etheric Lances do not have long-range capability. They're a closing and point-blank weapon system only. You are sort of locked into those, though. You don't have the option to swap those out for anything else. Interestingly, no generators involved with this ship, so you don't have any generator options on these. All right, so now we're on to the Mass 1 models, finally. The Diogenes Torpedo Submarine. 3 submarines for 90 points, and then you can gain additional ones up to 6 total. Pulse broadsides are sort of okay, but the Seeker torpedoes, right, are really good. So what's interesting about the Seeker torpedoes at long range is that they start with 3 base and then they link with 3, right? So that means that if you have a full pack of 6 of these things, they're going to be kicking out a torpedo salvo that is 18 dice. Not bad. And that's before, actually, I misspoke because you also have Pack Hunter, right? So that means that you have +2. That's going to take you to 20 dice. 20 torpedo dice from this thing coming at you probably on turn 1, because between the deployment rules and the speed capability of this unit, they're very easily going to get into long range on turn 1, right? So this could be potentially a very deadly unit. Now, granted, a full pack of 6 of these is going to cost 180 points. But still, 20 dice is 20 dice. That can really put a hurt on something. Now, granted, it is submerged, and so they're going to take some submerged defensive fire on return a whole bit. But kind of like that unit. The Germain Zebek. All right, so this has a particle beamer. Okay, and so this is going to be sort of your ranged option for your small units because it gets pretty decent dice at long range. Slightly cheaper, 87 points for 3, and then 29 points for each additional one. I'll point out that from this unit, if you had a full pack of 6, right, having those particle beamers means that you could potentially kick out a combined total of 19 dice for particle beamers. And remember, those are sustained. Very deadly. Expensive, but very deadly. Because you don't really get much in the way of defenses against these because they're gunnery, if you're another faction other than the Enlightened. So the downsides, of course, in addition to their cost, is their fray value is low because of the fact that they are automata. And they don't have Pack Hunter, which means they miss out on that potential boost. Here we go, the different type of submarine. Okay, so this is kind of an up-close and personal option compared to the Diogenes, because your Stergenium Agitator here is going to be sort of a boost to the Etheric Lance, and the Etheric Lance is only point blank and closing. So this is sort of a great assassination thing for your large models, especially with this unexpected arrival, because you can basically, to use a 40K reference, you can deep strike this thing into point blank range if you wanted to, right? So yeah, this is, and then of course you also have a really good fray value, right? So you have 2, and they're expensive because they're 60 points each, and you can get additional 2 more. But if you think about having 4 of these showing up right on your doorstep, kicking out a decent, respectable amount of firepower, and then following it up with a very, very high fray value, I mean, this could be a potential, surprise, I'm home kind of strike against an enemy. This could very easily knock out a Mass 3 model without too much difficulty, I imagine. Now, granted, you're talking about 240 points, so it should be able to do that. But this definitely falls into kind of the dirty trick category of stuff to pull on somebody, right? All right, the Lotan Assault Machine. Okay, so this is kind of the worm-style models that you used to see for the Dystopian Wars models from Spartan. It has the same unexpected arrival capability, and it has, this is where you get the CS Shock Moth, which is a ramming 6 arc and devastating capability. So if you have 2 of these, you can really do a lot of ramming damage to a model. Their fray values aren't as good as the Ketos is, 5 versus 7, but that is still nothing to sneeze at. And so this could be a great way to finish off a Mass 3 model that's damaged, or it can potentially do a hurting on some high priority Mass 2 model that's floating around out there. All right, Marion Frigate. So this is your other option from the original Prometheus box set. Uses the same basic model as the Zebek, just a weapon swap. Pulse emitter instead. So, the pulse emitter, remember, is your shorter range option. So this is more of your sort of get up close and personal attack, right? Because you can potentially get just a ferocious amount of dice out of these things at close range. And what's more is they have a decent chance of actually being able to get there, right? Because they have the Wave Lurker capability, and they also have the Pack Hunter capability, which gives them a boost to their dice. So these are something that you might actually want to try and hold in reserve, or otherwise find some tricks to get them into close range, because they really shine at closing and point-blank range. And then the last one here, the Praxilla Hunter Submarine. So a couple of interesting things. Giant Slayer is pretty neat. Reroll blanks when you're targeting a Mass 3 model. Cool. The Hydrothermic Borer. Okay, so this is a special weapon that is only on here. Similar to the Shock Maw in that it is ramming 6. But instead of arc and devastating, it has piercing. Okay. Which means that you can more easily cause critical effects on the target. And then this hammer sweep is a nice boost to that borer special rule, because it's a ramming weapon. So this allows you to gain +2 to your ramming dice pool, and it makes sense since you're trying to ram things with it. This is more. This is very clearly a Mass 3, Mass 4 assassination unit. The only downside is you don't get the unexpected arrival special rule with it, so it does have to approach across the table. But it is a submerged unit, and that means that it will be able to avoid the worst of incoming fire, and its speed of 8 means it'll be able to close the distance pretty rapidly. So, especially given the hammer sweep. Now, hammer sweep, this is a unique thing for the Enlightened. This is pretty much the standard special rule for the Commonwealth. So if you're looking for a way to use some of those special abilities in a different faction, well, here you go. Hammer sweep is an option. All right, so that's all of the units so far. Let's talk about fleet options. So you have 5 options, the sort of the standard basic Enlightened Battlefleet, and then 4 special ones. So let's take a look at each one. You have some special rules. Command reroll. Once per game, it allows you to take all the dice in your action pool and reroll them. So if you have a big, 20+ dice pool, your big major attack, and you totally whiff it, you can use this reroll capability to reroll it. And then you have the Pfeister Ambush special rule, which is sort of like a Combat Air Patrol special attack at the start of the game. So it starts off with only 2 to 3 Pfeisters, as we'll see, but you can buy more additional tokens, up to 6. So this is basically an option to try and pull off a massive alpha strike. If you buy enough additional tokens, you could be a threat to a Mass 3 model. So this could be a way to do a true alpha strike on the first round against a high priority target. And I would really, if you're going to try and boost your ambush stack for additional 22 points per token, you're going to want to target that key Mass 3 or Mass 4 model on your opponent's side, right? All right, so this is your very basic one here. Couldn't be simpler. Just a flagship, up to 4 units that have the Enlightened trait, and you can't include more than 1 of any unit. And then you have a command reroll. So this is just kind of the standard one that you can try. Not a lot of special sauce here. The next one's the Archimedes Battlefleet. So this is where you have to take the Archimedes class. Now, I should note you can take either the Archimedes, or you can take your special named variant, because the Schneider has the Archimedes class trait to it. Then you also have to take an Antarctica, Tacitus, or Ulysses class unit. Okay. Now, the important thing to remember about those units, right, is that they are the kind of the pricier options. So you're basically required to take an expensive Mass 2 unit as part of your list. So depending on how much you are planning on spending on other things, that does sort of limit your flexibility a little bit. And then you can take up to 2 other units, and you can't take more than 1 unit than the Antarctica, Tassus, or Ulysses. So it sort of limits some flexibility there as well. Now the bonus is you do get a command reroll, and you can get each Antarctica, Tassus, or Ulysses class gets you an additional reroll. So that could potentially be very powerful, but this is definitely sort of an elite list where you're taking smaller numbers of more expensive models, which, as you may remember, I'm not super in favor of in 3.0. The Descartes Battlefleet. I don't want to put the cart before the horse. So this is obviously a control ship focused list. Interesting, you must include a Lovelace unit. I'm not sure what the reasoning is for sort of limiting your flexibility by forcing you to take a Lovelace. So just as a reminder, the Lovelace is sort of your standard line cruiser design, 93 points per. And then you can have up to 3 more units, and you can't include more than 2 of any unit except the Lovelace or the Vesalius, which makes sense, right? Because the Vesalius is your Pfeister Construct surgical ship. It's your support ship. And of course, this is where we see our first Pfeister ambush come in, which is handy. And if you have 3 units, you can include an additional +2 constructs instead of the usual +1. So that's potentially a great way to boost your ambush capability. But you're sort of very much focused on your Pfeister constructs at this point. The Hypatia Battlefield. So here's your other fleet built around your Mass 3 units. Again, Lovelace or Tacitus. So it's interesting that they're requiring a mandatory Mass 2 unit. Up to 3 units, so you can have up to 4 total. No more than 2. That's all pretty similar at this point. Now we see a command reroll and the Pfeister ambush. And if you max out your unit sizes, you can actually save some points on your Hypatia Generator. So that's sort of an interesting tweak. And it's definitely a great encouragement to take maxed out units, right? Then finally, the Autonomous Research Battlefleet. So this is one of the more flexible lists, actually. The only thing is you have to take one of these units, okay? Which isn't too bad because the Newton has some interesting capabilities. This might be one of the few times where you'd want to take the Void Engine Cruiser. As I said, it is kind of a high-risk, high-reward thing. But you also have the options to take a Claudius, which is not a bad choice. That's that Victory and Valor card, mining, merchantman that we talked about. So all in all, not too bad. This is one of the more interesting and more flexible options, I think, for the fleet building. Sort of the tricky part is you have to have 3 automata units in order to get this special boost to the Chaos and Disarray. To be honest with you, I wouldn't stress out too much about not being able to get 3 automata units into your list because that's sort of a minor buff. It is a buff, but it's sort of a minor one. The key thing is this is a way to get both Pfeister Ambush and Command Reroll with a limited amount of restrictions on your fleet building. So this is actually one of the more flexible fleet build lists that you can come up with. So that being said, let's talk about some fleet builds. First one is, and you'll have to excuse the joke here. Pfeister, I barely know her. This is where you focus on the Descartes Battlefleet, and you take Vesalius Pfeister surgical ships, and you're striving to maximize your Pfeister ambush. And this is also a good case to buy additional tokens for the ambush so that you can just maximize that Alpha Strike. And the key with this fleet list is maximizing that Alpha Strike to try and put a real hurt on a Mass 3 or Mass 4 flagship model because you need to get that boost to get ahead. And if that initial Alpha Strike doesn't go well, then you're going to be facing a real uphill battle, especially if you sank, a whole frigate squadron worth of points into that Pfeister ambush boost. Then I have also Death from Below, where you use the Hypatia Battlefleet and you just maximize the use of your submarines. And this is going to be really great for sort of really taking out those Mass 3, Mass 4 models and then just sort of sweeping up or mopping up the Mass 2 and 3 ones, that are left afterwards. Faction rating. So I'm giving the Enlightened a score of 8. They are a fast fleet. They have great maneuverability, so they definitely score well there. Offense, you get lots and lots of dice, and we're talking about raining down 20-plus dice pools at long range from more than one unit in the list. You know, and you have the option of doing that with gunnery or with rockets or with torpedoes, depending on which unit you're taking. Definitely a very offensive-minded fleet. Defense, also better than average. Your defensive values are better than average across the board. And you also have lots of internal shield generators and the option to take other defensive generators. You have Luminiferous Defenses, which is a unique special sauce. You have Wave Lurker. So, you know, you have lots of defensive tricks. Now, the downside is that you pay for all that. And so in this case, having a cost value or a score that's low is I know it's sort of backwards, but I'm saying that units are more expensive. And so the more expensive overall your units are, the lower your cost rating. It might be a little counterintuitive. And then your variety, though, is really high. This is one of the best factions in the game right now as far as variety goes. And so the overall rating, and keep in mind this is not an average. This is just sort of a cumulative score, you know, adjusted as I see it, is as an 8. So I do think this is a slightly more powerful faction than the Union is, at least right now, because that's the only one I've scored so far. All right, so final thoughts. The Enlightened are the bag of fancy tricks faction, okay? They have all kinds of special abilities, special weapons unique to them. And, you know, that means that they can also pull all kinds of dirty tricks. They're one of the more complete factions in that they've got a lot of models and a lot of kits released for them so far. So you have just more stat lines to play with and more fleet options to play with anyway. In a lot of ways, the Enlightened are the classic elite factions. You've got units that are individually more powerful, and they have more special abilities, and they have the ability to do more combos and that type of thing, but they are more expensive per unit, okay? And so that's a challenge in Dystopian Wars 3.0 because, you know, my assessment, just based off the games I've played so far, really is that the game sort of rewards factions that take lots of relatively inexpensive units and isn't so rewarding of factions that take lots, not lots, but a smaller number of really kitted out, very fancy units. So, you know, that being said, it is still possible to have a really powerful list with the Enlightened. It's just they're more of they require a little more finesse. They're not really a blunt instrument. They're more of a rapier than a battle axe or something like that. So depending on your play style, that means that it may or may not be a suitable faction for you. So sort of keep that in mind. All right, so thanks for watching. That kind of wraps up the Enlightened ORBAT overview. I am still sort of feeling my way through these, and so if you have any feedback, either points I missed, things I got wrong, or things that I didn't consider that I should have in the discussion here, please let me know. And you know, I'm definitely interested in feedback on the format for how I'm doing this because, you know, I plan on doing revisits of these in the future as revisions to the Orbats come out. As a matter of fact, within the next week or so, there's supposed to be some revisions coming out for the Orbats that might actually change, you know, some of the things that I've just talked about. So, you know, we'll deal with that as it comes. But for now, I'm going to leave this off. And this is Ruckdog saying until next time, good luck and good hunting.